Native American history is deeply intertwined with the arrival of European colonizers and the subsequent colonization of the Americas. Before the arrival of Europeans, Native American tribes had diverse cultures, economies, and social structures across the continent. However, European contact brought significant changes, including the introduction of slavery. While often overlooked, Native American slave ownership is an important aspect of American history that sheds light on the complexities of power dynamics and the cultural exchange during that time. Native American tribes had their own practices and systems of labor before European contact. Some tribes practiced forms of servitude, captivity, or forced labor, but these practices were distinct from the slavery that emerged with European colonization. But what makes this practice different from the ones after it? And why does it seem forgotten in some ways? Welcome back to History in Minutes. Today, we'll be taking a look through a peephole that'll introduce us to the last slave owners of America. What was Native American slavery? Native American slave ownership is an often overlooked aspect of American history. Prior to European contact, Native American tribes had their own societal structures and labor systems. The specific practices varied across tribes, but they generally relied on communal labor and kinship-based relationships. Labor was organized based on gender, age, and skill, with tasks such as farming, hunting, and gathering assigned accordingly. While there were instances of servitude and captivity, these practices differed from the slavery that would emerge later. Native American tribes had a long history of engaging in conflicts and taking captives during warfare. Captives were typically integrated into the tribe through adoption or servitude, which involved performing labor tasks for the tribe. The treatment of captives varied among tribes, with some adopting a more assimilative approach, while others maintained a distinct status for captives. Early European contact and the introduction of African slavery. With the arrival of Europeans and the establishment of European colonies in the Americas, the transatlantic slave trade introduced African slaves to the New World. European colonizers sought labor to support their expanding enterprises, and the Atlantic slave trade became an integral part of their economic system. Native American tribes, already involved in trade networks, became participants in the slave trade, although their involvement varied. Some Native American tribes acted as intermediaries in the slave trade, serving as middlemen between the European slavers and African suppliers. They facilitated the exchange of goods, including firearms, for enslaved Africans. The tribes involved in the trade saw economic opportunities in acquiring slaves for labor and sought to enhance their own power through this involvement. As the demand for labor increased, Native American tribes started adopting African slavery themselves. This adoption was influenced by various factors, including economic considerations, cultural interactions with European colonizers, and the desire to strengthen their own societies. African slaves were integrated into Native American communities and performed various tasks, including agricultural work, household labor, and other forms of manual labor. For example, tribes like the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole had African slaves within their communities. The Cherokee Nation in particular had prominent slave owners such as the Ross family, led by John Ross. The Choctaw Nation included the LaFleur family, known for their slave ownership and involvement in the plantation economy. The Seminole Nation also had Native American slave owners, while the Seminole freedmen, descendants of African slaves, played significant roles in Seminole society. Native American slave ownership during and after the American Revolution. Native American slave ownership persisted during and after the American Revolution, despite the revolutionary ideals of freedom and equality that were being espoused. The Revolution brought significant changes to the relationships between Native American tribes and the newly formed United States. Native American tribes formed alliances with both the British and the American colonists, often based on their own strategic interests. During the Revolution, some Native American tribes, such as the Creek, Choctaw, and Cherokee, aligned themselves with the British in hopes of protecting their lands and sovereignty. These alliances led to conflicts with American colonists who sought to expand westward. While the American Revolution itself was not directly related to the issue of slavery, it further complicated the relationships between the Native American tribes and the United States. Despite the rhetoric of liberty and equality, Native American slave ownership continued after the American Revolution. The new United States government recognized tribal sovereignty and sought to establish treaties with Native American tribes. However, these treaties often ignored the issue of slavery within tribal communities, allowing it to persist. Native American tribes, including those who had aligned with the British during the Revolution, maintained their own societal structures, which included slave ownership. Removal and relocation policies. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, enacted under President Andrew Jackson's administration, had a significant impact on Native American slave ownership. This act authorized the removal of Native American tribes from their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States to designated Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. The forced removal, known as the Trail of Tears, uprooted thousands of Native Americans, including those who owned slaves. The removal and relocation policies disrupted Native American societies and had implications for slave ownership. As tribes were relocated, they often had to relinquish their lands and adapt to unfamiliar environments. This displacement and upheaval had consequences for the continuation of slave ownership within the Native American communities. Some tribes abandoned or gradually phased out slaveholding practices, while others attempted to maintain their slaveholding traditions in the new territories. The Civil War and the end of Native American slave ownership. The Civil War marked a pivotal moment in American history, including its impact on Native American slave ownership. Native American tribes were divided in their loyalties and participation in the war, reflecting the complexities of their relationships with the United States and the Confederacy. During the Civil War, some Native American tribes, such as the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Creek, aligned themselves with the Confederacy. They provided support in the form of soldiers, supplies, and strategic alliances. Native Americans fought in several significant battles, including the Battle of Pea Ridge and the Battle of Honey Springs. Their involvement in the war reflected their efforts to protect their tribal lands, the sovereignty, and their way of life. But it also meant they were indirectly supporting the institution of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863, declared the freedom of the enslaved people in Confederate-held territories. However, it did not immediately apply to Native American tribes who were not a part of the Confederacy. The impact of the Emancipation Proclamation on Native American slave ownership varied depending on the specific tribe and its relationship with the United States. For tribes that aligned with the Confederacy, the Emancipation Proclamation did not directly affect their slave ownership, since they were not under Union control. However, as the war progressed and the Union forces gained ground, some enslaved individuals took advantage of the shifting dynamics and sought refuge with Union troops. This led to a gradual erosion of slave ownership within those tribes. For tribes that were aligned with or had treaties with the United States, the Emancipation Proclamation and subsequent legislative efforts, such as the 13th Amendment, did apply to them. The abolition of slavery within the United States had implications for Native American tribes, and some tribes willingly emancipated their enslaved individuals. However, the transition away from slaveholding practices was not always immediate or universally accepted, and some Native American tribes continued to resist the emancipation of their enslaved population. The legacy of Native American slave ownership has had an enduring cultural and social implication. Native American perspectives on slavery varied across tribes, reflecting diverse cultural norms, beliefs, and practices. Some tribes viewed slavery as a means of integrating captives into their societies through adoption or servitude, while others saw it as a means of economic and social power. These differing perspectives shed light on the complex interactions between Native Americans and African slaves within tribal communities. The interactions between enslaved Africans and Native Americans left a significant impact. Cultural exchanges and relationships developed between the two groups, resulting in the blending of languages, customs, and traditions. These interactions influenced the development of unique communities and cultural practices, such as the Gullah Geechee people along the southeastern coast. From a historical standpoint, Native American slave ownership is a topic that sparks historiographical debates. Acknowledging the complexity of Native American slave ownership challenges simplistic narratives of good versus evil or oppression versus oppressed. It highlights the nuanced power dynamics and cultural interactions that existed during the time. The representation of Native American slave ownership in history has also evolved over time. Traditional historical narratives often focused on the African slave experience within European-owned plantations, overshadowing the role of Native Americans as slave owners. However, contemporary scholarship and increased recognition of diverse historical perspectives has shed light on the Native American involvement in slavery. This inclusion has enriched our understanding of the multifaceted history of slavery in America and the complex dynamics between different racial and ethnic groups. This ends today's video. If you learned something new, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content worth your every minute.